There are parts of the Blue Hills where invaders are destroying habitat that animals rely on. Today you'll see a part of the park that is struggling because of a very fast-growing invasive plant. I'm Judy Lara-Jacobs, the Executive Director of the Friends of the Blue Hills.
And I'm Rick Kessley. I'm the Chair of the Biology Department at UMass Boston.
And we are in the westernmost part of the Blue Hills, which is called Fowl Meadow. And we don't often see people here, so we would love to know whether or not you have been to the Blue Hills. A yes or no in the comments would be great. And if you have any other comments later to write when you're watching the live or the replay, just write them in the comments. And Rick can answer pretty much any of your plant-related questions about the Blue Hills. This is the third of 4 trial runs of Blue Hills Alive. The next one will be Tuesday at 1 o'clock, and we hope you'll join us then as well. So, Rick, thanks so much for being here. And why don't you start out by talking about Fowl Meadow and what kinds of plants and animals, what kinds of ecosystems you'll find here.
Okay, Judy. Well, Fowl Meadow is a wetland, obviously. From the name fowl, it presumably means birds and not fowl in any other way. Wetlands are very important ecosystems. They do all sorts of things for us. Obviously things like flood control, but they control pollution. They reduce nitrogen compounds that are a problem. They sequester carbon. And they obviously are home for a very, very large, wide diversity of plants and animals. The plant there's a number of different plants in this area, some relatively uncommon ones, and obviously lots of very common ones. And were you asking about animals too? Would you like to know about those? One thing I was going to mention is a couple years ago I came here with a friend of mine, Fred St. Hours, who's an expert on dragonflies and damselflies. And in about a 2-hour time with my kids toting along, we found, I think, 25 to 30 species of dragonflies and damselflies right in this area. There's obviously lots of other things. There's deer, there's coyotes, there are certainly lots of birds, and in the Blue Hills anyways, there's at least 11 species of amphibians, as well as reptiles and a number of other critters here. So lots of them live in this area.
Great. So can you give a basic description of what's an invasive species?
Good question. Maybe by starting to say that the vegetation in Massachusetts, I think it's around 40% of the vegetation is not native. But not native isn't the same thing as invasive. There are a handful of very aggressive invaders, and when I say invasive, I usually define it as species that are non-native but also enter natural habitats, and distinguishing it from things like weedy species. There's lots of weedy species, dandelions in your yard, all sorts of things along the sides of the roads, but most of these species never get into natural habitats and certainly never displace the natural flora in the area. So distinguish those two things. Invasive species tend to displace natural flora in the area.
So there are a number of invasive species in the park. We're in front of one of them. Do you want to tell us which one?
Well, you brought me here to look at this particular species. This is common name is mile-a-minute. It's the genus is Persicaria. It's actually in the buckwheat family, and it does not grow a mile a minute. That would be 60 miles an hour. But I have heard that people record it growing as fast as 6 inches in a day. You can see that it's a really flimsy looking plant, and it's a vine growing up on top of all the other plants in this area. I think partly it can grow so quickly because it really doesn't produce a lot of stem biomass. It's really thin, but it produces a lot of leaves. And you can look at this area here, you can see that it completely covers all the other plants in this area. There are native plants under here. There's some red osier. I see some alders, as well as lots of herbaceous things. There's goldenrod that's no longer in flower, but sitting right there. And it looks like the mile-a-minute here sort of covers all of it, blocks the sunlight, which the plants obviously need, and it obviously eventually covers some of these plants and will probably kill them, shade them out. The plant is an annual, so it grew all of this. I don't know how long this is, but in just this year. And you can see it on the top up there. So that's all 1 year's growth. So that tells you how fast this thing can go.
It's great. And how did it get here?
How did it get here? It's originally from Eastern Asia, apparently, and the information I saw that it was deliberately brought here in the late 1800s, but never escaped from those particular times. But in apparently something like 1930s, it was a contaminant on horticultural crops or horticultural plants that were brought into Pennsylvania. And it's since that time, 1930s, it's been spreading both north and south. So it's southern Massachusetts, it's here, Connecticut, New Jersey, it's heavily infested, and south into North Carolina, and I think as far west as Ohio. And how it got there, I mean, maybe it has these really pretty little blue berries, and apparently lots of birds like them. So birds will eat them and then drop the seeds wherever a bird happens to go. Dispersal by birds is a pretty good way to get around quickly.
That's great. So if you have any questions for Rick, just a reminder, just write them in the comments below and he can get back to you about plants in the Blue Hills. For a number of years running, we brought volunteers out to hand pull these plants, and this year there's a management plan that the state is working on, so we haven't been out here, but how else are these plants being controlled?
Well, the hand pulling is certainly one way, and the best time to do that is before it sets fruit and seeds, that I think can be very successful, especially for recent introductions in places. If it's been there for a while, one problem with this is the seeds can, even though it's an annual, the seeds can fall into the soil and last for up to 6 years. So you could remove all this, make sure it sets no fruit, and it would probably come back for several years after that. So now that the population is so big, the state is using the weevil, also from Asia, that specifically targets this particular plant. So the state does a lot of, or researchers do a lot of work to make sure that the plant is the biocontrol, in this case the weevil, is very specific for a particular plant so that it doesn't attack other things. And the weevil has been released in either nearby here, a little further that direction in the foul meadow. It's been released in Falmouth, and I guess I've been told it's been released in other areas nearby. So, we have people on the path. I was told about 34,000 weevils have been released so far over the last 8 years. There seems to be some success with it, but obviously it's very much still here. So it hasn't completely, it may be controlling it to some extent, but it certainly hasn't eradicated it yet.
Great. So if you see mile-a-minute in your yard or someplace that is not the Blue Hills, then you'll want to report it to the state, and you can go to massnrc.org to report it. And what would someone look for if they want to identify the mile-a-minute?
So that's a good question. I think it's pretty obvious looking. It's got a very distinct triangular leaf. Obviously other things have triangular leaves, but the other characteristic are these downward aiming thorns, and these barbs actually help it climb things. Its other common name is Asiatic tear thumb, and I will guarantee that it will tear your thumb if you try to pull this. It's sticking to me right now. You can see it's just hanging on my hand. So you find this triangular leaf, these thorns. It also has this interesting bract at each of the nodes, and that's also a pretty much common trait of it. And of course, the blueberries, if you have it at this late in the season. But again, it'd be, as mentioned, if you can find this early, pull it out early, the better, before it sets seed.
Great. Is there anything else I should have asked that you want to share?
Anything else you should have asked? Let's see. I can't really think of anything specific for this at the moment. You can definitely see the damage it caused, so if you do find it, it's certainly appropriate to remove it early or contact somebody. And if you call us or take a picture of it, we can certainly identify it pretty quickly for you.
Great. So thanks for talking with us, and thanks for watching. And if you are someone who loves the Blue Hills and want to support it, you'll really want to come to our annual celebration, which is this Thursday, October 5th, 7 o'clock at the Hoosick Club in Milton. And you can find out more information. Thanks, Rick. You'll find out more information at friendsofthebluehills.org/celebrate2017. And we hope that you'll join us next Tuesday at 1 o'clock. And we'll be talking to a really talented educator and photographer who will talk about some creatures in the Blue Hills that you may not have seen before. So we hope to see you next Tuesday. Thanks for watching.